Good afternoon, safety champions, and welcome to another edition of the Aviassist Focus Sessions. And once again, we come from Africa. Today we broadcast from the Rwandan capital Kigali, something we are still really excited about. Kigali is also the home of Africa's first aviation safety promotion center, the Aviassist Safety Promotion Center, Rwanda. With the focus sessions, Aviassist brings you affordable and certified continuous professional development to raise that bar on aviation safety in Africa ever higher. In our focus sessions, we train and entertain for African aviation safety. Because every day, thousands of professionals like you work really hard to keep aviation safety, to keep commercial aviation basically the safest form of transport, also in Africa. And you do it not because you want recognition, but because you know your industry and your country rely on it, and because it's simply the right thing to do. Today we'll be looking at fatigue risk management. And it's good to know that this episode is sponsored by aircraft manufacturer Airbus. Today at the table I'm joined by two specialists in fatigue management. My first guest is Amy Kiiru. Amy started her career as a flight operations intern with American Airlines and now works as pilot and flight safety manager with one of our sponsors, Kenya Airways. Great to have you at the table, Amy.
Thank you for having me. It's a great honor.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
And our second guest is Nicolas Kamanzi. Nicolas works as a cabin crew member with our partner Rwandair and is responsible for Rwandair's fatigue risk management system. Nicolas.
Thanks, Tom.
And now before we dive into today's topic, let me just give something to the viewers because we have a prize draw, as you may know. If you're a regular viewer, you have a chance to win $100 in cash in each episode. And here's how it works. Throughout the show, we'll give you 2 letters. Every 10 minutes or so, we'll show you one of the guest's favorite books. And just write down the first letter of the first name of the author. And when you combine those 2 letters, you get a 2-letter code, which you submit on the webpage at the bottom of the screen. And you have 15 minutes until after this live broadcast to submit your code. And then from all the correct answers, one lucky winner will receive $100 in cash. And we'll announce the winner on our LinkedIn page. So that's an extra good reason to make sure you follow us on LinkedIn. Right, so let's get started and talk about fatigue risk management. Nicolas, if I can perhaps start with you. Can you briefly explain what is fatigue risk management and why is it important in our industry?
Thanks. That's an interesting question, actually. Now that I think of it, fatigue risk management in simple terms is just it's a data-driven means of continuously assessing fatigue risks within a roster pattern, and the key role here is to ensure that crew operate at an acceptable level of safety. Yeah, so that goes beyond the normal limits, flight time limitations.
Okay.
Where we put in aspects of data and also scientific principles to make sure that crew operate at an acceptable level of safety.
Yeah. Okay, and when you say scientific data, what should I think about? What is it you use then?
There are many tools that are approved by different regulators. And, with that scientific aspect, I mean that they've been tested in laboratories to put in certain human aspect of like the vocals and all that. So that is how this comes in as a scientific.
Okay. Well, you mentioned this WOCL. We'll come to it later again because it's very unknown for those who are outside of this.
Sure.
So Amy, so basically just to help us understand, because I think for a lot of people out there, they'll think this is flight time limitations like Nicolas said. So what is the big difference between what we used to have as flight time limitations and where we're going now? It's this science, but what else would be added, you would say?
So when we look at flight time limitations, it's more of a prescriptive approach to managing safety, and the direction that FRMS is going to is more performance-based. Okay. So as opposed to prescriptive, where it is a set of rules which and regulations which are put in place to be able to mitigate the risk. Mm-hmm. From an FRMS perspective, where it's performance-based, it's actually looking at the actual normal day-to-day activities and analyzing them, and then coming up with mitigation measures based on real time.
And the actual performance of a crew, you're saying actual data from crew you have available. So again, prescriptive, because I think some of our viewers are pretty new in the industry. Prescriptive means the regulator will say you may not fly more than 8 hours.
Yes.
But it may not take account of where that flight goes,
Correct.
how many time zones you pass,
etc. Yes.
And that's something that you have to put in place when you implement FMRS.
Correct.
Okay. Now, one thing also we spoke about a little bit before, Nicolas, when we met in the room, is this issue of is fatigue a weakness? Because some people would say, if you're tired, even though you are a pilot or a cabin crew or a mechanic, where increasingly also fatigue risk management is implemented, it just means that person is weak, right? He should just be fit.
Yeah, there's a lot of myth around that, especially there's a lot of cultural differences. And also, I like to say that most of the times there's also like a national culture which can be mixed with the safety culture.
Okay.
And those should be different. Obviously, every culture has the positives and negatives, but we should ride on the positives in this case. Basically, there's that as a challenge.
Yeah.
But also, it is important to understand that the aviation is a very fast-paced industry, and people operate abnormal hours of the day. So it is imperative to think that fatigue is not a risk or a weakness, rather to actually embrace it and take measures, and also draw commitments as much as possible.
Commitments in terms of that you also want people to abide by the system you put in place, that they rest themselves enough, for example. You mean that kind of commitment? Or?
No, I mean the commitment to manage fatigue as any hazard.
Oh, right. Okay. So not treat it different like other hazards you have in the operation, but see it as one of the many hazards that you have in the organization.
Yeah.
And so we have to accept that fatigue is not a weakness, but it happens to everybody, basically. And it's how you manage that then.
Yeah.
Okay.
It starts with the groundwork is basically to acknowledge that it is a hazard.
And that it's not something to be ashamed of.
That has potential to impair the crew's capability to operate an aircraft, for that matter. So that is the commitment that I want, at least from the management and also from the crew, because there's the management responsibilities and the crew responsibilities. Yeah.
To accept the commitment, basically, that it's just a risk or a hazard like any other hazard in that respect. Okay, fair enough. And I think also on that fatigue and the cultural part of things, how has that been for you in Kenya Airways, Amy? How have you managed to sort of communicate that image, or that message, I should say?
I think maybe to build on, I would like to say that the commitment to fatigue management is not an individual approach. So we have to bring in maybe your civil aviation regulation, the organization or the companies or the airlines, and then the individuals. So the three of them have to come together to agree to work together to be able to manage fatigue.
So say that again, that's the operator, the regulator, and the individual.
Okay. So it's like a cogwheel. It cannot work without the other partner or the other party. So the regulator in this perspective is giving the framework. For example, the operator would come in and put in things like looking at evaluating the routes, coming up with the scheduling, and coming up with opportunities for rest and sleep. And then now the individual, who is the crew or the maintenance engineer or the pilot, would then now take the opportunity they've been given and actually use it for rest and sleep. So all have to work together such that even if you're given the opportunity to rest, you're actually resting,
as opposed
to coming and running your own errands and trying to make the most of your day and then show up at work. So it has to all work together to make sense.
Which I can imagine is a temptation as a crew, isn't it? Yes. If you're on a nice exotic outstation like New York or Paris or Johannesburg. So that's a tempt. And you're saying then you also, as Nicolas also mentioned, you need that commitment from that crew member to want to play his or her part in that.
Yeah.
Now we briefly heard Nicolas mention WOCL. which was a new thing for me when we first delivered the first fatigue risk management course. Can you talk us through it? What is WOCL?
Okay.
WOCL, I
So
think?
WOCL, yes.
Yes.
WOCL is an acronym.
Yes.
And the acronym speaks of window of circadian low.
Yes.
So window of circadian low is more or less the body clock is broken down. So body clock is our internal clock that tells you when you need to wake up and when you go to sleep. So majority of the time, our body clock is acclimatized to light perspective or perception. So when you expose your body to natural light most of the time, then the body clock learns to reacclimatize based on the natural light and the timings. So easy way to think about it is like a really young child or a really young baby. And when they wake up and you expose them to light, they learn that's the time they're supposed to be waking up. And then they learn the difference between light and darkness.
Yes.
And that now controls the body clock. So window of circadian low is the time usually between around 2 a.m. to about 4:30, 5 a.m., where your body is more or less in sleep mode, or it thinks that it should be sleeping. And if you think about it from an aviation perspective, we're a 24-hour operation.
Yeah.
So we do have operations that happen on the timings where we're in our WOCL.
I love that word, actually.
So that's why it's so important, and it plays a part in terms of how we approach fatigue in terms of aviation.
And of course, Nicolas, Amy was saying, on the one hand, you have this window from, let's say, 2 to 5 in the morning, where you'll be struggling because of absence of daylight, if I understand you correctly. Your body wants to sleep, whether you're a cool guy or a cool girl or not. It's just how it is. But of course, that will become even more complicated when you go through time zones, right? If you have a flight to Bangkok or to Mumbai.
Yeah.
How does that work then? How does that influence where your body clock goes, basically? Because I can imagine if you're in a destination with a different time zone for a long time, maybe your body clock adjusts. But if you're there for just 24 hours or 48 hours, it may not.
Yeah, that's there's a bit. I mean, fatigue risk management is still a matter of ongoing research, and as far as I know, is that when you are crossing a time zone of not more than 2 hours from your initial departure time, then you are still acclimatized. But if it's more than that,
it becomes a challenge.
The recovery period becomes longer. So that's why it becomes a challenge, because the airline obviously has to keep a commercial schedule going. And that becomes a challenge. That's where fatigue risk management comes in, to use operational data and to try and put in mitigations that are appropriate to lower the risk at an acceptable level of safety, basically. So that is basically what I would say in terms of like time zone,
how it impacts. So it's not just flying through the night, but if that night also takes you to 3, 4, 5 hours time difference or more, that has another almost a cascading impact on safety, or on your WOCL, and where you are in your body, basically, what your clock tells you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we take a short commercial break for a message from one of our sponsors.
We are here, leading the way. The world's #1 regional aircraft manufacturer, advancing safe and reliable aviation, always caring about the comfort and well-being of our passengers, endlessly striving to achieve the highest levels of safety through continuous improvement, constantly building customers' trust based on quality and care. That's us. We are responsible, committed, and passionate, here to make a difference. We are ATR.
Welcome back to the Focus Sessions, and today we're talking about fatigue risk management with my guests Amy Kiiru and Nicolas Kamanzi. So, Amy, I also would love to explore a little bit from both of you, how you got into aviation, what were the key moments, because we have a lot of young viewers often who are thinking about aviation, who are starting out on their journey in aviation, and they sometimes, they can do with helpful tips maybe you have. Tell us about your start and where you are now.
All right. I think I initially fell in love with airplanes when my dad used to take us to watch planes in Wilson Airport. So Wilson Airport is a really small airport, regional airport in Nairobi, and it's very close to where we used to live.
Okay.
So we used to pretty much go close to the fence, and we could see planes taking off and landings. Exactly. And then when we drive by there in the evening, we would be able to see the lights and the different lights. And I used to wonder, why are they different colors from what we would normally see for the taxiways? And I was really young, so that drew my interest into aviation. I eventually was able to venture into it when I was in university. So I was interested in it, and put the information forward, but it wasn't really a direction my parents wanted me to go. But more or less fought against the grain, so to speak, to be able to push. And for that, I was saving my pocket money to be able to buy my uniform, just to show them that it's really something that I would want to do, and if they can just assist me in that. And that really helped me. At least they saw the dedication and the interest was there, and I was eventually able to join private pilot training in Wilson, the same Wilson that I used to go to as a child. Exactly. So I eventually ended up there and did my private pilot's training there at a school that used to be called CMC. It's no longer there anymore, and from there we more or less took off. So to speak.
When you said earlier on that you bought your uniform with your pocket money, what is that for? Because you didn't have your PPL then.
I didn't have the PPL then.
Why wear a uniform?
I wanted to be part of the pilot. So I went out and looked for a pilot shirt and purchased that. And it was meant to be used for my university and college and things like that. But I came back and said, okay, I'm really still interested in this. I have uniform. I can put together money to try and buy the books, but I just really it's something I do want to pursue.
And it was a very visible sign to everybody else that you were serious about.
Yes.
That's a very interesting
But when you wear it, you believe it.
Yeah, that's, I guess, yeah.
True.
Nicolas?
Yeah, I mean, that was a great start. I mean, well, I think mine was a bit different. I started off at the airport. Basically, I was doing an internship. And I could watch the planes come in, land, and take off, and during sunsets, and just basically like started falling in love with it. So then I saw an offer outside, and then I applied for a cabin crew. Then I started off as a junior cabin crew, started flying around and seeing the world in different.
Initially, mostly within Africa, I would think, right? You start on shorter routes.
Yeah. And I started falling in love with basically the different cultures that are out there that we don't get to see on TV, basically, and how people are genuine, how people are nice, and how you start talking to them, and they tell you the different kind of stuff they have. So later on, I came to the safety department, where I am running the FRMS program for Rwanda Air. And basically,
that's your journey.
That's my journey in a nutshell.
Well, I think what's really interesting also for those people out there who are interested in fatigue risk management, that again, maybe the default would be to think it's only relevant for cockpit crew, and so the person in charge would have to be a pilot. But I think, it's fair to say we spoke about that it's a little bit at least that it's cabin crew, cockpit crew, and increasingly also engineering, for example. And you're a good example of that, I think, isn't it? Where it's not the obvious pilot who would be, because wouldn't you think, does it also take a certain personality to be in charge of fatigue risk management?
I would say so. I would say it requires somebody with dedication and interest in the field. So you have to, anything touching on safety generally would require somebody who has the interest to be able to keep up with the changing times and regulations and the updates, and who is looking to make their workplace better. So it's not just about ticking boxes, it's about improving the process.
And also certain, communication skills, perhaps?
Yes, yeah.
Why would that be important, you think, Nicolas? Why would we need people in safety or fatigue risk management systems to have certain personality traits, if you like, communication skills?
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more, Amy. I think with safety, you're obviously going to give feedback. And giving feedback is such an art, right? So you need to have good communication skills in your toolkit to make sure that you give good feedback, good quality feedback, and make sure that it goes across the way you
intended to.
Yeah, you intended to. Yeah, so it's quite very, very crucial But yeah.
To have though, yeah. And actually, we have as aviacists, we have a team leadership in aviation course as well. And one of the things people find the most interesting module in that course is indeed the feedback. You know, how to not shout at somebody when you don't agree or something, but find another way to communicate that. And I think especially when, you know, earlier we spoke about the fact that some people initially might think fatigue is a weakness. So that means you have to be able to communicate that very elegantly, perhaps to people who are more, you know, hierarchically minded, that it is not a weakness. You not there, Amy, you recognize that?
I do agree, and I recognize that, and I agree as well with him, because when you come to approaching safety, it is not about the individual, it's about the objective, and therefore what you do plays into a bigger role, and you need to be aware that you are a contributor to the general operation.
The system.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
It's time for our first book before I forget, because the viewers out there want a chance to win their $100. So for the people out there, the first book today is by Jackson Biko, Let Me Call You Back. So the only thing that's important for you out there is the first letter in aviation, the Juliet. Who brought this book to the studio?
I did.
Can you briefly say why? What does the book mean to you?
Okay, so Jackson Biko is a Kenyan author, and that's part of the reason why I brought him. I'm trying to promote our Kenyan authors, and he's a personal good friend, and he does books on general life experience, and it's very, very relatable when you do read his books, because it's something that you might have gone through or you can relate with, which is why he draws his readers in. So he does his books in small. You can be able to finish that in a day or 2 or 3, but it's relatable. That's the main thing.
And it's Kenyan, which is nice.
And
it's nice to bring,
yes.
first of all, an African, and secondly also, well, very nice. Thank you very much for taking this to the studio. Now, just back to the viewers out there, we also offer a chance for you to qualify for a certificate of attendance. And you can read all about the exam and the qualification criteria on our website. Now let's go back briefly to the discussion on, not briefly, let's go back to the discussion on fatigue risk management. If I would both ask you, what are some of the main challenges you've seen, perhaps not even in your operations, but in general with fatigue risk management? If you have to highlight 1 or 2 things, Amy, and then I'll come to you, Nicolas, afterwards. What is the challenge that airlines experience when they start implementing this?
If I was to point out something, it's why are we changing, and we've been doing this all along. So it's more or less the understanding of why the FRMS is coming in and what it is meant to address. And people sometimes feel like, does it mean that what we've been doing all along has been the wrong thing? So increasing the awareness and increasing the understanding really goes a long way to demystify what it is, because generally, as a typical human being, there's resistance to change, but being able to understand why the change is there. Yes, you've been doing things, it's not necessarily wrong. However, there's a better way to be able to do the same thing. Yeah.
And so what are some of the tools that you've maybe used in KQ, in Kenya Airways, to get better awareness, better understanding? I mean, you can write a newsletter or something, but you may have come up with other ways of doing that?
Mostly it's just normal communication. So we will have short courses, like we have CBT courses that are going on. You can do it at
CBT being
computer-based training.
Computer-based training, yes.
Computer-based training courses that you can go on and try and understand by yourself. We have actual training and awareness, of course, the newsletters, the bulletins and things like that. But we also try and send out like videos that we might see from other YouTube videos that we could see that play a role in how fatigue contributed to something. So a good example is the aircraft accident investigation videos, and seeing how that could have been improved and how fatigue did play a role in contributing to the accident, and how people can learn from that. So it's been a journey.
But also some ingenious things. I think just use those YouTube clips. And I mean, Aviassist has also contributed to some of those air crash investigation programs. And of course, sometimes they don't have time to deal with all the details in an episode, but it does give a very nice insight indeed into the main issues at hand. So Nicolas, that brings me to you. The same question really. What are some of the challenges that you see in FRMS in general, or perhaps in Rwanda, that you've managed to address?
Speaking of the challenges, I think the main one is just basically the mindset shift, and recognizing that the aviation is like there's a lot of cultural differences, and with that comes that's also a challenge of its own. And it is important to create awareness around that, and also not ignoring that there's also challenges to do with the with the cultures and all of that.
You mean the culture within the company, or different cultures that you employ, or what?
Yeah, different cultures that you employ.
Okay.
And making sure that everyone is on board, and not relying much on what you think that fatigue is perceived basically out there, but what the people out there think. So it is good to tap into the existing data sets, and also, if it's possible, tap into send out surveys to understand the different demographics and what the thoughts are.
Different demographics. Explain that. You mean younger people, older people, or?
Yeah,
because that makes a difference as well.
True.
So whether you have a young cabin crew or a young pilot versus somebody who already has 20. So what kind of differences should I think of then? Why is that an issue?
Because there's so many factors. There's age, there's lifestyle, and that plays a very big role in how we perceive these things. Because a younger person will probably tend to think that I'm good. I go to the
I'm
gym.
fit.
Yeah.
And I can handle a few nights out in a row before I start on the shift.
Yeah. But contrary to what maybe someone with 10 years of experience would actually say. Yeah. So that's what the demographic.
The culture, yeah. Is that something, because I see you reacting as well, Amy, do you see that as well, the difference between people who are maybe young in the industry versus people who have experience? How does that manifest itself, you think?
So if I was to play that out in like a real scenario, if you're looking at your older individuals and what they're going through life at that moment vis-a-vis somebody middle of their life in their maybe 30s, 40s vis-a-vis somebody who's younger. So whatever they're going through is completely different because they're in different phases of life. So the pressures you'd expect from a younger individual is their interest is spending more time with their friends. They want to be social, they want to go out, they want to hang out, and that's where the interest lies. When it comes to your middle age, maybe they're dealing with young families, young children, and therefore that might affect their levels of fatigue. And then when you're dealing with maybe the more mature generation, then they're more or less dealing with, a completely different, the kids are probably in college and they're looking at ways of how to be able to build for retirement. So the life challenges are different, whatever they go through is different, and how they live their day-to-day does play a role in how the fatigue they experience in terms of exposure and what they're doing.
Because fatigue is not just being tired, right? It's also the stresses you use.
Correct, yeah.
So you're saying if somebody's young and has a child, and this brings it back to sleep again, but sleeps less because the baby is crying.
Yeah, or, things like that. Yeah.
So that's the sleep, but it can also be just stresses, like you said, raising, if you have kids of 20 that go to university, you need
there you go.
school fees. Yes. So that's not just tiredness, it's also the whole human factor.
It's encompassing.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's interesting to hear. And I also want to tap in again, actually, to the culture thing, because some airlines in Africa, and I think Rwanda is an example of that. In Kenya, you're to some extent lucky. You have a big aviation industry. You have many flight schools, including the one that you trained at and many others at Wilson. So you have a lot of Kenyan pilots. But Rwandair and other carriers in the region sometimes really have to tap into pilots from abroad. I think you have dozens of different nationalities working for the airline. Is that something you try to address, and how would you address it in terms of fatigue risk management?
Well, I think I'll just come back to the safety culture.
Yeah.
Everything that we do within the airport and aviation basically is the safety culture. And with that comes with the just culture and how we tell everyone that, reporting is everyone's responsibility, and also you don't get punished for reporting, basically. So if maybe coming from different cultures, there's maybe different myths about, whatnot.
Yeah, myth or different hierarchy views, perhaps, sometimes.
Yeah, true. And basically we try to tackle down that with physical training. We have a lot of training and also onboarding.
Onboarding when you hire a new person?
Yes. So onboarding processes, we take them through the safety culture, we take them through the company, and basically what they should expect from the safety perspective. And if they know how to report, what channels are appropriate, and tell them that we have a confidentiality rule. So all that makes it a safe environment for everyone, basically, within the airline. Yeah.
But I mean, I think of a video that we have from Aviasis, which is still available on our YouTube channel, by the way, which speaks about multinationality in the cockpit crew. I mean, the extreme example is not something I make up, but in hierarchy perception is between Norway and Nigeria, where some people, you know, in Norway, everything is very flat in hierarchy perspective, whereas in Nigeria, it's the steepest perspective. You have those things, of course, also in your airline when you have cabin crew from elsewhere. So yes, it's nice to say we take them through training, but is there different things you have to do with people who come from this massively different culture, perhaps? And how do you, any ideas, or how would you deal with that?
One of the things we've implemented in Kenya Airways to be able to deal with the authority gradient is joint briefings.
Okay.
So joint briefings is where the pilots and the cabin crew would come together, or anybody who's operating that flight would come together and have a briefing on the flight as a team. So not only does it build the team cohesion, but it also is able to break down, and you feel like you can be able to talk to the captain, for example, and be able to approach him because you've been able to speak to him during the briefing, and it becomes easier. And that has really gone a long way in helping to sort of settle down the hierarchy. Yeah, so that's one of the simple tools that it's a quick tool to implement, and it can really go a long way in being able to level that out.
And do you do those briefings before you reach the aircraft as a crew, or once you're in the aircraft? What's the common practice for KQ, for example?
So for us, for example, depending whether you're operating from base or from outstation, if you're operating from outstation, it will be done at the hotel, so at checkout. So
before you leave the hotel.
Before you leave the hotel to go, yeah. So is where you'd have that engagement and discussion. And at base, it would be at the airport. We have a crew center where you'd be able to meet as a crew, and that's where you do your joint briefing before you proceed on board. Unless anybody's come in late, then they'll probably just be given a brief of what has happened. But that's the environment we try and do it at.
And they're not supposed to come late, of course.
No, of course.
But it happens.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's a very, some tips for the viewers, this briefing indeed as well beforehand, which I think addresses not just fatigue, but you mean to say you can sort of really build a team in a time span of 15 minutes more so than without such a briefing. In terms of, reporting and things happening, in the sense that can a crew member just call in, cabin crew or pilot crew, and say, actually, I'm tired, I don't want to fly? Is that, because I can imagine that happens, and the tiredness may be just because they had a party last night and they didn't observe their rest time. But so how is that being dealt with in brief? If you have somebody like that who just calls in, whether it's party or not, but he calls you to say, I'm tired.
So from our airline, we will take whatever it is you say as fact.
Okay.
So if you do report, we actually encourage people to report fatigued, as opposed to trying to push beyond their normal limits just to be able to maintain the safety envelope of the operation. So we do allow people to call in fatigue. You call in to our normal would be to crew scheduling or crew planning, who would then now disassign you from the flight and notify us in the safety office. And then we will then follow up with you as the individual to try and get more information
as to why you fatigue,
as to what could be the lead of the fatigue. So we look at the operational perspective in terms of your roster. We'll go and look at your roster over the last 3 months, and then we'll put that in with whatever information you give us from your home environment, and then through that we'll be able to run it through. We have a tool that we use to be able to check in terms of fatigue levels, and based on the outcome we will give recommendations.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how's that? Is that recognizable for you in run there?
Yeah. Well, maybe just to echo what Amy just said. We will definitely accept the report and run a quick overview of the schedules, and with the presence of modeling platforms where we just use different data sets and parameters and see how much of the fatigue element
Could be
contribute.
from the schedule, for
Yeah,
example.
from the schedule or the pattern basically. So then from there, we know if it is something that we need to take up to the fatigue safety action groups, or maybe if it is something to do with the individual. And so it's a very open process, and everything is kept transparent between the crew and the safety office to see how we can improve the system, basically.
Yeah. Because the starting point always in aviation is it's a systematic error until the contrary has been proven. Hold your thoughts there for a moment. I have to go to the second book for the viewers out there who want to win $100. This is Ikigai, written by Hector Garcia and another author, but for you, the H for Hector is important, hotel in aviation. So, Ikigai, it was you, Nicolas.
Yeah.
Briefly, why did you take this book to the studio today?
Well, it speaks to me in many ways, but maybe to start off with, Ikigai is a metaphor for raison d'être, or a reason for being.
Raison d'être. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
And it is famous for the Japanese philosophy of longevity.
Living a long life, basically.
Yeah. So,
living a long and happy life, it says.
yes,
Yeah.
which is linked to the presence of having a raison d'être, something to live for. Yeah. So in the airline, it also speaks a lot, because then it speaks about lifestyle, how you need to behave, wellness and all that. Yeah.
Okay, so actually you could imagine it could play a role in fatigue risk management as well, in terms of people being aware of the fact that to live a long and happy life, including a job in aviation, there's some tips in here then, Nicolas. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Well, time for another short break from our discussions here at the table, because if you're new to AviAssist and you don't know really what we do, even though we've been doing it for 30 years, we're celebrating a 30th anniversary here, we've got a short video explaining what we do.
Africa, a continent on the rise. Africa is the world's second biggest air transport growth market, and there is a lot to do. Africa is in the process of giving the continental aviation industry a place on the world map, on all fronts. This requires unprecedented efforts, even more so in a post-COVID-19 recovery. It means eliminating a backlog, but also respecting sustainability and CO2 emissions, building safety on the ground and in the air with technical and operational training. More than ever, international cooperation is vital to give what is arguably the most important economic link between Africa and the rest of the world, connecting people across the vast distances in Africa. An essential link, and that's why there is AviAssist. Africa and AviAssist. We have been leading, building and supporting safety promotion for the African aviation industry since 1995. Affordable, independent and professional. We stand up for aviation safety in Africa. We change attitudes and produce safety. Our professionals support African professionals, and we do it with passion by delivering on-site and online courses across Africa and more. AviAssist. Join us in Kigali or anywhere else on the continent. The African aviation industry needs you right now, more than ever. AviAssist.
Right, let's pick up where we left off on fatigue risk management. Just take you briefly back to this reporting thing, because you both said, you take it as a fact. So if somebody calls in fatigued, you trust that they are truly fatigued. I remember that in some of the discussions we had, Amy, at KQ in the course, is that some people say, well, people will abuse it. They'll just say, I had a party last night. And I vividly remember that the instructor there, Alexander Holmes for AviAssist, said, well, true, but the number of people who actually abuse the system is usually very small. Yeah. Is that what you've seen over the years?
Yeah, and it's okay. It's one of the things that is anticipated when you're rolling something out. So it is expected that when something new does come out, it'll be abused somewhat until people get an understanding of it, and then now it is used for. So we do not dismiss everybody assuming that it's being abused. We take it as fact. And then after looking into it is where we determine whether it was actual or, somebody's just trying to get out of a flight or something along that line. So I would say by being able to gather the data, being able to set up the surveys and get people come back and giving us information really helps being able to understand and grow the FRMS to a point that it makes sense.
And also, I guess, to over time, which we need for a just culture anyway, build that trust in the organization, that you must be able to trust that people do not abuse the fact that you take it on face value, basically.
Yes, yeah.
We've on a few occasions mentioned data. I want to come to you on that, Nicolas. I think one of the things which we discovered as we were preparing for the course in Kenya is that there's actually, for example, very little sleep data available in Africa. I think the only thing we came across is South Africa, but we don't even know what the sleep patterns are of a regular employee of an airline. What do you see as a role for data in this? How do we improve the availability of data from Africa?
Cool. I think there's so many ways. I mentioned surveys, and I think that is just one way of getting data. But there's so many ways to get data. For example, you could look at the check-in, check-out. You could look at the time the fatigue reports are sent in, and basically try and identify which window is most prone to fatigue, basically. So while there's no single rule to look out for these data, there are so many ways to go around it.
Yeah. I think one thing we spoke about, Amy, in Nairobi is we're very keen as aviasyst to work with the operators to start that first bit of sleep research, just to find out, how much does an average pilot sleep and when does he sleep. And so I'm looking forward to setting that up, perhaps with Rwandair and Kenya Airways. Yeah. And then I think it's also really important that we involve all those stakeholders, the unions, the cabin crew, the schedulers, etc. Well, let's work on that and make that happen. I think the last question I'd like to ask before we come to the end of today's show: do you think the fatigue risk management, does it have to be tailored to Africa? I think partially you've answered it, of course, because you say it depends on people's lifestyle. But can we simply get a fatigue risk management system from Cathay Pacific or from Air France? Say, okay, we now have it.
I think you can just possibly borrow the framework, but you'll still have to tailor make it to your particular region and the particular cultures that you have within your region. We don't have a one size fits all, so to speak, for FRMS, but it'll have to be tailor made to your particular sort of scope and scale of operations and being able to implement. So what I would have in Nairobi would possibly be very different from what Nicolas would have for Rwandair, because as much as we are in Africa and we are in East Africa, the scale of operations is different. The destinations are different. They vary. Our regulations are also vary as well. So we can borrow some parts of it, but not entirely.
I think even if you think of just lifestyle, what you mentioned before, I've been in a traffic jam both in Kigali and Nairobi. They're of a different magnitude, so the stress that traffic jams cause in Nairobi will be far bigger than the traffic jams in Kigali, having an impact on those lifestyles.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Nicolas, what are your experiences in terms of tailoring and borrowing from good examples?
Yeah, my experience is that your thresholds, for example, in Europe or Asia might not necessarily translate to our thresholds in.
What do you mean with thresholds?
I mean...
threshold for what?
For fatigue risks, for example. What makes an acceptable level of fatigue, right? So, because most systems operate on a point scale, so that has to be defined.
What do you mean with a point scale? A certain flight brings a certain number of points, so to say?
Yeah. Basically, you need to establish baselines to know which point is acceptable. And I'm speaking a lot of statistics, but
that's okay.
Yeah, but basically, if you import, if you take some, like maybe an acceptable level of safety based on a threshold, maybe of Europe or Asia, that might not really necessarily work. So it needs to be, the FRMS needs to be fit for purpose in all aspects. including even the aspect of using available data and tools to measure the actual fatigue. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, lovely guests. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for joining me here in the studio in Rwanda. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
And then to your lovely viewers out there from Luanda to Dar es Salaam to Antananarivo and Gaborone, thank you for tuning in for safety. If you have enjoyed today's focus sessions, please be our ambassador and tell all your friends or colleagues about the work of Aviassist and about these focus sessions. Visit the first African Aviation Safety Promotion Center, the ASPC Rwanda here in Kigali. Lots of exciting courses coming up there in the years ahead. We will also have several courses take place at Landover Aviation Business School in Lagos, Nigeria, including a Safety Management Systems course and an International Airlaw course. And we also have many more courses coming up in Kenya, Namibia, South Africa and Zambia. And as we always say at Aviassist, only you can target safety. We look forward to continue our mission with you to improve African aviation safety. Join us again for the next focus session and continue your learning. Same time, same frequency. For now, thanks for watching.